So tonight I am delighted to introduce Corinne Duhig. She teaches in the Department of Archaeology here at the University of Cambridge and also the Institute of Continuing Education at Madingley. Her specialism is the study of human remains, and her main, although not exclusive, focus is on ancient Egypt. Corinne's a senior fellow of the MacDonald Institute for Archaeological Research. She runs the osteoarchaeology and funerary archaeology consultancy Gone to the Earth, and her research interests are primarily the interpretation of burial practices and the superimposed effects of topophony, I can't even say that, Corinne, post-mortem effects that transform the body, the trauma of interpersonal violence and physiological stress indicators. I'm going to just say a quick thing that we first met 2 years ago because Corinne has a special tie to the college. She's not only our Director of Studies, she's also the DOS at Wolfson College, I should add. But she's helped us in many ways, and she's performed, that's the wrong word. She's kindly been part of a panel in one of our careers programs, Catalyst, talking about alternative careers for primarily medical and veterinary students. But most importantly, she has made us the holders, I guess that's the guardians, of the largest collection of skeletal remains in the university. And those now reside with us. She first approached us about this about a year ago now. They came to us in Christmas of this year, and they were to form part of what will be a really exciting new program at Lucy, and that's really putting together additional study materials for our students. So that will be based in the basement of the library, and Corinne is very kindly going to help introduce our skeletons to all our students and to people like people coming on open days and so on. So it's exciting times for us, lots of skeletons. So Corinne, without further ado, you are going to give us, I'm sure, a wonderful talk on life stories from human remains. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. Hi, everyone. I hope you like my background. I've got some of my friends here, including, so I've got some of my teaching material, and also we have here Milo the Smelos, who is my favourite Smilodon. So you don't need to see me, thank goodness. So I'm going to straight into talking over a very brief PowerPoint, and it's very personal. So I'm talking about what I do using only examples of material that I've worked on or have written about. So I'm not cheating with taking pictures from anybody else this time. And I'm dealing with the two aspects, paleoanthropology and also forensic anthropology, which had been my work for a lot of years. And in fact, my successor in forensic archaeology and anthropology is part of this audience. Hi, Caroline. So without further ado, we will have a look at the screen, and I've got a little video at the end. I've always wanted to say, here's one I prepared earlier, and this will be, here's one I prepared earlier. Right. Now, I understand there's an argument about the Latin in this title, but this title is Mortui vivos docent, or Mortui viventes docent, is actually the motto of the Paleopathology Association, so it closely links to what I do. But the focus here today is life stories. What I'm not going to do is talk about how we analyse large collections of archaeological skeletal material. I'm going to look only at the stories of individual people, because I think that's something that we can all identify with more easily. If at some time in the future that I feel that I'm going to talk about ancient populations and their health and their life stories, we'll let you know, and that'll be another one. So some of you know, and a lot of you don't. I hope a lot of you don't. What does actually an osteoarchaeologist do? And I'm using this really rather lovely image called the skeleton hunt down at the bottom to show you what we do. So the human remains that I examine in the course of my work are representing several different things. They are diaries or archives. They hold in themselves records of that person's life. So the bones are changed by things that happen in life. So that's the one we're really going to be concentrating on today. They're also artifacts because when you die, or even before you die, people do things to your body which tell stories about them and about the society that you're in. So we'll deal a little bit with that, but a bit less. The third thing, which I've sort of hidden away in the square brackets, is human remains are also stopped clocks. And this means they are a resource for dating methods so that we can use bones to radiocarbon date and use some other dating methods to say when these people actually lived. Now, the skeleton hunt is the very specific picture saying, look, inside these 4 different mammals in the picture, we've got the skeletons, but actually we've got the shadows of the living creatures. And that's what we're trying to get back to in my course of work. Well, osteoarchaeologist is talking about bones, but actually other people use different titles. They call themselves biological anthropologists, paleoanthropologists, various things of that sort. I've always stuck with this title because it was the one that I began with, but we don't just work on the osteo, the bone part. We do look at inhumed bone. This is our main focus of attention, like this reasonably well-preserved skeleton here in the picture. Cheers, everyone. This, as you see, is a coffee cup. It is not chin. Right. Sometimes we don't have the inhumed bone because preservation conditions in the soil are so bad that all we have are the teeth left, which is what you see I've just added onto the picture. The teeth are harder than the bone, and sometimes all we have is a set of teeth smiling up at us. We also deal with cremated bone, which we're not going to look at today. That's a whole new question. But the picture I'm showing you is one of the largest pieces of cremated bone that I've worked on in archaeological material. It tends to be quite badly broken up, but you'd be surprised at how much you can learn from it. And I think that makes me resolve that I'll give a talk about that in the future. We look at other hard tissues. Well, apart from bone, teeth are a hard tissue, but also calculi, that is gallstones, kidney stones, bladder stones, they're also hard tissues. And this picture is a picture of a bladder stone that was presented to me in a box with the skeleton by an archaeological team. And it's one of the largest that has ever been found in a skeleton. Pretty awful, really, pretty dreadful to have lived with and to have died with. We also, if we're lucky, look at preserved soft tissue, and this is where my work in Egyptology can be a lot of fun because we have more available than just bone. We've got all the other soft tissues to examine. And the picture of the mummy that I've shown you down below is a combination between that and a mould. Now you can see, looking at that mummy picture, that it looks as though if you opened it up, you would see the bones and soft tissue inside. It looks like a conventional mummy. However, many mummies and many mummified bodies from different parts of the world actually are only a mould. When you get inside, there's nothing left, or there's just bone left, like the human remains found at Pompeii, for example. And this particular mummy, which I worked on in Egypt, was one of those, because when you look through the bandages, there was nothing you could actually see except crumbly bones. Now, linked in with this, after I'd worked many years in this field, I was invited to work in forensic archaeology and anthropology. And I'm only going to talk about the anthropology part today, so I'm not going to talk about actually digging and finding human remains. Forensic anthropology is the same sort of methodology on human remains as you would use on ancient skeletons and bodies. But one of my colleagues, one of the actual founders really of forensic archaeology and anthropology, described this work as an awesome responsibility. And he meant that in the strict term of awesome. Yes, it's awesome, exciting, but actually it's a heavy responsibility, because Within archaeology, we try to get it right. But within forensics, we have to get it right, because otherwise we've made an incorrect identification of a deceased person, or we have fouled up an investigation which can't go any further in the justice system. So it's a very heavy responsibility indeed. And it breaks up into two parts. One is identifying the individuals, because in so many cases, remains are found, and the key point is, who are they? We maybe don't even think there's a crime, but we don't know who they are. So I'm showing you a couple of examples down below of the kind of condition of remains as they might well be in, either completely skeletonized, as you see on the left, or on the right, you see there's just a little bit of soft tissue there, but sometimes there can be a lot more soft tissue. My responsibility within forensics will be to work with the Home Office pathologist. That is the equivalent of the forensic medical examiner, you might say, to identify these individuals, talk about perhaps their mode of death. And that leads on to, we've not only given closure to the people who've lost someone, but we're also leading towards justice. So we're helping to inform the police in the next steps of the investigation, if that is in fact a crime or is it not? And if it is a crime, who could have perpetrated that crime? We maybe can contribute to that. So what do we actually do? And I'm sorry for those of you who are experienced in this subject. This is utterly basic. You could almost chant it along with me, couldn't you? How do we start? Well, we start, the bones come out of the ground, and then we have to clean them up and we have to repair them as necessary, because otherwise we can't really see what we're doing. So looking at the picture on the right at the top, you will see a skull as it was found in the ground in a hill fort near Cambridge, where I'm speaking from, and it was a pancake, really. And my job was to identify this individual's characteristics. First of all, I had to glue the skull back together. And the bottom picture shows you what the skull was like when it was glued back together. So I've managed to get a complete skull out of it. There was a lower jaw to join onto it. We'll come back to that one later on because it had a bit of a surprise for us. Then we do an inventory. So we list every single bone or bone part that we have. Now, if we're going to look at populations, it will be interesting to see how well preserved they are. Do we get complete inventories as we go along? Sometimes we do. Sometimes, because of burial practice or damage, we don't. We get very little. Then, having got, let us imagine, a reconstructed skeleton lying out on my table. Behind me, where you see my skulls back there, that is in fact my bone work table, and the remains will be laid out there. And what we're trying to do is look for the big four. These are the key points of talking about an individual. So first of all, what is their ethnicity, or who are they related to if we have a group population? What is the sex of the individual? What is the age? And then their stature, and going a little bit more individual, their body form. Are they short and wide or tall and narrow? Do we think they were heavily built? Did they have strong musculature? And that leads us through the big four into what is the more challenging and more interesting side of it, which is, what about the pathologies? What did they suffer from in life that we can actually spot on the remains? And then individuation is closely related to that. It's little differences that we all have one to another in our skeletons, which are not pathological because they don't lead to disease, but they are unique to us and they can tell us about who we are. We will see examples in a short while. So I'm just giving you some random examples of these different things which I enjoyed or which entertained me. And this is an instance that I have written about, though I haven't unfortunately examined these particular mummies. So what we're looking at here is the two top pictures of two rather elderly ladies from ancient Egypt. And for those of you who know, these are early 18th dynasty Egyptian royals. What you can see from them both is that they have quite a pronounced overjet in their teeth. So their top teeth are well in advance of their bottom teeth. When you look below, you will see an X-ray. This is of a male relative of the same family, and he has the same overjet. You can see it very clearly in his X-ray that his top teeth are way in advance of his bottom teeth. They don't bite together very neatly. Now, these people are all very closely related to each other. They're a bit of an inbred family, and they're going to get more and more inbred as we go through that particular dynasty and that family. Now, the person we're interested in here is the chap bottom right, who is one of the royal mummies of ancient Egypt, and he's been described as the pharaoh Thutmose I. Well, how are we going to know? These days, we can do DNA. We can say who is related to whom out of the royal mummies of Egypt. Unfortunately, DNA from ancient Egypt is very badly preserved usually, because there is a rule that says that ancient DNA preserves less well the closer you are to the equator. It's a simple temperature rule. But back in the day, long ago, somebody had noticed that this man didn't appear to look like the rest of his family. Remember, they're all inbred. So what they noticed very much was, here's the X-ray of his face, and you can see from his teeth, he does not have the overjet that most of the rest of his family have. He's got quite forward pointing teeth, but it's very different. And this led people in the past to think, is he actually who he's said to be? Has the labeling on this mummy gone wrong? Well, now we've moved on and people are doing DNA and other kinds of studies on these mummies. And we can see fairly clearly that whoever he isn't who he's said to be. I've got my ideas about this. And the reason I included it is that I've been arguing a similar topic about people at the end of this family's control of Egypt. So we will see more about this, but this chap is probably not the pharaoh Thutmose I, and not a pharaoh at all. Here's a silly one. How do we determine the sex in mummies or skeletons? It's not all going to be Egypt, I promise you. Well, we look at various shapes of the bones, and primarily we look at the pelvis, because this is absolutely obvious to all that the pelvis in a female needs to be adapted to holding the fetus, so childbearing, and childbirth. The actual exit has to be large enough for childbirth. Now, these two mummies are both in Cambridge. The one on the left, these are very late, so they have these portraits on them. The one on the left is in the Fitzwilliam Museum. The one on the right is in Girton College, for those of you who are around Cambridge. And they had been x-rayed at one time. And I noticed that the x-ray on the left attached to the man was slightly bewildering. And then the parallel x-ray of the woman was also slightly bewildering, because actually the shape of the pelvis on the left is that of a female. You can see the round shape that the pelvis contains, and you can see an angle pointed up at the front of the pelvis, which is female. It's very open. It allows for childbirth. Whereas the one on the right, it has a small volume and it has a small aperture. In other words, the x-rays of these two mummies had got crossed over when they'd been done originally and had been deposited in the wrong places. So that's just a little bit of silliness, but it shows you what we can do fairly easily, even when we can't actually handle the remains. Now I'm going to talk about something which is much, much more serious. Those of you who are British, and perhaps some of those of you who are not, will know about this case, which was, what was it, more than 10 years ago now, 18 years ago. 2 small girls were murdered and hidden in a little village near Cambridge. And here are the 2 little girls in their picture, and we have from them their actual ages. I was involved in this investigation, and examined their remains when they were found. And what we're looking at here is we were trying to confirm that they were the girls that we thought they were. It might seem obvious that if you find a burial, a very recent burial of 2 young children, that you know who it is. But obviously we've got to confirm this in every possible detail. So I was one of the many people involved in it. And what I was looking at were elements of their bones, and particularly their teeth. So here is an X-ray of a lower jaw, which has the tooth development that was rather like that of the girls, from which you can see, and I hope my pointer is going to work, this is what we call the 6-year molar. A person with this is at least 6 years old. It's the first permanent molar. And behind it, you can see that the next molars, 12-year-old and around about 18-year-old, unless you get impacted wisdom teeth like I did, they will come up in slow succession. In front here, we can see teeth buried in the jaw, and that shows us exactly what dental development age they are at. And below now, I put up the actual records, the diagrams of how I noted these dentitions in the mortuary as I worked on them. And it's very complicated, as you can see. It shows they have some baby teeth, they have some adult teeth, they have some other features, dental crowding, some damage to the teeth, and so on. What it showed in the end is that the dental age in each case contained the range that matched. One of them, Holly, one of them, Jessica. So it was part of our confirmation of this particular identification. Now we're back to Egypt again, and in the Valley of the Kings, which of course everybody knows about, there is a tomb called Tomb 55. And the picture on the left shows you what it was like when it was excavated. There is a coffin in there, and it's obviously been very badly disturbed, and there's been water in the tomb, and there's been roof collapse, and it's all a bit of a mess. But inside that coffin, there was a sort of a mummy, basically a skeleton with some bandages that had decayed in the wet. And on the right, I show you what the coffin looks like when it is cleaned up, and it's now in the Cairo Museum. Who is this person? This coffin is magnificent. It is set with semi-precious stones. It is absolutely awesome in the more casual use of the word. And it has on its face the royal beard. This is meant to show the mark of a ruler. What is curious is that it's wearing a female wig. Compare it with this one. This is the middle of the 3 coffins of Tutankhamun, and it has this same little pattern all over it, the pattern that represents feathers all over it. So we can see that whoever the person was who owned this coffin, they were very, very high status indeed. They're covered in gold and semi-precious jewels. But as you can see on the front of this coffin, there's a section that's been cut out, and that is the royal name. So let's look at the bones. Who is it? For those of you in Egyptology, it's not the pharaoh Akhenaten. Nope, I will show you why. This skeleton, we'll call it that, has been examined very often. The picture shows you part of the face with the teeth. So I want you to note those teeth in a moment. Recent DNA shows that this person, it is a man, was the father of Tutankhamun. So, little Tutankhamun was right at the end of his dynasty. His family died out, but we know the names of the various individuals in the family, and the only person we seem to have available to be his father was the pharaoh Akhenaten, whose mummy is missing. So, is it Akhenaten? Now, Akhenaten is, for those who are interested in Egyptology, what you might call a trigger point, because he's very controversial, but we're not going to go there today. Anyway, the Cairo Museum currently has this skeleton shown as Pharaoh Akhenaten, but the great paleopathologist Eugen Struchal from the Czech Republic, and then me, we used forensic techniques to work out what we know about this skeleton. Eugen Struchal used the techniques used in the eastern part of Europe, from Germany going eastwards, I suppose, and I used the techniques that are used in Western Europe and the US, and we were delighted to discover that we agreed completely. The skeleton from Kings Valley 55 was no more than 23. The pharaoh Akhenaten was in his later 30s, at least, at death. It's not him. And I'm going to show you why. There are many instances on this skeleton, but look at the picture at the top. This is a typical set of ancient Egyptian teeth. Really unhappy teeth. They have been worn so badly they've lost every scrap of enamel on the tops of the teeth, which means that they have then got infections in the pulp of the tooth and they've got abscesses. Most ancient Egyptians would have been pretty uncomfortable because their teeth were so bad. However, the skeleton from KV 55 has what we would call childlike teeth. No wear on them at all. The person is not old enough to have got that level of wear. So that's one of the many proof points that he is younger than he needs to be. Down at the bottom, we see, this is obviously a resin cast of a pelvis, but what we're interested in here is at the front of the pelvis, this zone, get back, this zone here is called the pubic symphysis, and it changes through your life because it's weight bearing in a sense. Every step you take slightly compresses this joint in your body. So we can work out how old a person is from the state of that bone surface. So my very helpful colleague and friend, when she was in the Cairo Museum, she photographed that area of bone, and here it is. And you'll see that the point that is arrowed has something that looks like a rippled effect on it, or a ploughed field, we call it. This is the sign of someone who is very young, under 23, probably 19 to 20. So that is another one of about 18 points that we could raise that said, this individual cannot be who you think it is. So come on, Cairo Museum, relabel, please. On to the next, pathologies. So we're jumping through. What can we identify on bone? Obviously, there are a lot of diseases that we can't see because we need soft tissue, and we maybe even need to look at antibodies or something, but we can identify a lot of things. And I've graded these here on my list in level of usefulness, by which I mean most people have some sort of joint disease or arthritis eventually in their lives. Therefore, if you're trying to say something about the individual, this is not going to tell you very much. The person may be typical of their population. They're riddled in arthritis. They've worked very hard. In ancient bones, dental disease is the same. People usually had quite bad teeth, so it doesn't tell you so very much. As you go down, you start looking at things that only happen to a few people. Traumas and infections, physiological stress indicators, congenital and metabolic diseases, and tumours. We can find all of these in bones or having marked the bones in some way. we can also spot things that you can't really call pathology. Pregnancy is not a pathology. It feels like it sometimes, but no, it's not. But if it goes wrong, it sometimes changes the bones. And those of you who know about bones, I'm not actually talking about scars of parturition, so don't go away and have a fit. But here's a set of bones from the pelvis of an ancient Egyptian queen. So it's that same area, the pubic symphysis, so at the front of the pelvis. And you can see that one side is all scooped out and the edge is irregular, and it doesn't look symmetrical in any way at all. And if you look on the inside of this joint, you'd see it's all terribly pitted and spongy. It could be a sign that this particular woman had so much softening of the ligaments in pregnancy that she actually got tearing of these ligaments at the front of the pelvis. So it's telling a little bit of this woman's story. And we can even look at cultural practices. So this jaw below doesn't look like much. It's got almost a full set of teeth. But look at what is our bottom right, the individual's left, and you can see that there's one tooth that is very much more worn than the others. And on either side of it is a gap. This person has been doing something with their teeth that has worn them down so badly that two of them have either broken or decayed and fallen out, and there's one left remaining with this evidence. What are they doing? Lots of practices change teeth like this. Hairdressers holding clips and pins in their teeth, probably not hygienic anymore, but people used to. They get little marks in their teeth. Ancient people in medieval times in Britain used to smoke clay pipes, Renaissance times as well. They would mark the teeth. So what we can say about this jaw is that somebody's been doing something that has abraded those teeth very badly. Going on with dental disease, I thought you'd love to see the consequences of not cleaning your teeth. Children, do not follow these pictures. So just 3 instances. At the top left, you've got really someone who didn't clean their teeth. This is calculus. This is what happens if you don't get the dental hygienist ever. I think we're all beginning to feel a bit like this in lockdown. I certainly am. But this shows you either an individual or a population where they were not doing anything. They were not even poking between their teeth to clean them out. Below that is a forensic picture, and I've actually black and whited those pictures so that they are a little less difficult for you. Here's an individual who has absolutely rotten teeth. Down here you can see a great cavity in one side, and this tooth, it's lost half of itself through decay. There's masses of fillings, there's masses of fallen out fillings, so spaces. This person, though a modern person from Britain, neglected themselves, neglected their teeth so much that they've got this terrible condition. We're now seeing this horrible situation in a lot of places where people can't afford dental treatment anymore. So we're going to see more of this. Let's not go there. On the right, this large picture is a chap who I call Old Bill, or who was labelled Old Bill by the Old Bill in London, the police, when his remains were found in a London churchyard. Well, of course, he's entitled to be in a London churchyard, but actually he wasn't entitled to be in this London churchyard because he'd been disturbed from his grave and then popped back in somewhere else at a previous grave digging. So it was a story really of movement of bones. But what we can see on him is the consequences of total tooth loss into old age. It doesn't happen to us so much more these days, does it? But again, we see this in modern forensic cases where people couldn't afford dental treatment or didn't care for themselves. Now we'll look at disease. And there's a lot of diseases that we can't see on the bones, but some of the more severe ones we can see in archaeological material. The bones you see here are from somebody who had syphilis. And syphilis, when it becomes advanced enough, it attacks the bones. So you can see it produces holes in the skull. It produces massive swelling in the affected bones of limbs and pitting, great holes going through the bones. Now, it was and still is a dreadful disease if not treated. There's a little story that goes with this, and this is actually a story from some colleagues who they said I could share with you. On the left, we have a picture that is purported to be that of an Italian Renaissance noblewoman called Isabella Daragona. In the middle, you see the true skull of Isabella Daragona. It had to be removed from its grave in an Italian church as they were doing some restoration, and then it was put back. And when they examined the bones, they saw that Isabella's teeth looked very peculiar. Look at the picture on the right. There's no enamel on the front of the teeth at all, and yet they're flat. What's happened here is that she's been using an abrasive of some kind to rub the front of her teeth, which we know was done in Renaissance times and later. Why was she doing this? Looking between the teeth, there is a black metallic deposit, and this is mercury. Isabella had caught syphilis from her rake of a husband, and the only treatment that could be used at that time was mercury. It's highly poisonous. Probably the mercury treatment was as bad or nearly as bad as having the disease, and it also stained your teeth black. So she has been polishing her teeth to try to remove the evidence of this syphilis cure, this dreadful blackening. Poor Isabella. When we go into the cancers, it used to be said that you can't identify cancers in ancient material, or that they didn't have so much as we did. Now we know that they did, we just weren't looking for it correctly. Here's a man who does. The picture on the left shows him laid out in his grave. He's got this circle shape here is the metal boss of the large shield that would have covered one side of him. He had his spear with him as well, so he's a warrior. And the picture in the middle is a much younger me. There I am, kneeling between his grave on my left and the grave of another man who closely resembles him on the right. We're hoping that DNA is going to show that they were in fact closely related. Looks as though they are. So when I examined him, again, I had to glue his skull back together. But in the course of working through, I found the bones of his neck here are ragged looking. The bone of his skull in the bottom middle picture, ragged looking, with cavities through the middle parts of the bone. And the X-ray on the right shows that there are more cavities than we can see. So what's happened is that he's had a cancer of soft tissue. It's probably lung cancer. And it has spread through his bones. So he's had it in his body for some considerable time. And eventually it's gone into his bones and has produced these torn away looking lesions in his bones. We can surmise that he probably died of the cancer, but we can't say this. He could have died of something else completely, even while he's suffering from cancer. Whereas that's one of the things we have to be very careful about in looking at ancient remains, is not to suppose that what we're seeing was a cause of death, because actually the main causes of death were things like fevers, diarrheal diseases, that sort of thing. Now then, trauma. This is one of my particular interests. We can see various things. Accidental injuries. Looking at these two toe bones down below, you can see one of them's got a lump missing on the end. That's an easily produced fracture if you turn your foot while stepping over a low step. Or you fall on an outstretched hand, which I have now idiotically done twice, so I've broken both my wrists. Or something worse, if you land heavily on straight legs, you can crumple up parts of your spine, like in this middle picture here. Or some surgery can be called trauma. Looking at the picture down here on the right, what you see is a skull that has been surgically opened during life. And it's partly healed, so you can see the shape of the opening, and some bone flaps have been placed back in. If that person had lived longer, probably there would have been a great deal of bone infilling of that enormous defect. Unfortunately, this individual was killed, and so we were examining them after their second worst trauma. So they'd been shot. With deliberately produced injuries, we have various categories. We have projectile injuries. They're usually fairly small and neat. They tend to pass all the way through, though sometimes an ancient spear or javelin might get stuck. Arrows sometimes get stuck. But beyond that, blunt weapons, you can be struck by an axe, which is usually more blunt than sharp, or you can be hit by even a stone axe or a mace. With sharp weapons, you can be stabbed or you can be slashed. So something can be pushed into you or slide across your body in some way. We categorize these things because they take up different shapes, but actually the main thing is contingency. If people get into a fight, very often they pick up whatever is to hand or throw whatever is to hand to hurt the other person or bring them down. So we have to look out for unexpected things. Is it just a thrown stone? Here are some instances, all of which I've worked on, of trauma. I've used all skulls as an example. The top two on the left are stabbing injuries that have gone into the skull. Both of them have healed. You can see there's a lot of cracking around the second one, but it's still healed. Over on the right, you have, ignore the ring round the outside. What we're looking at is in the middle, there is a hole through the skull, and this is the tiny remains of a slash caused by a sword or something else that is very sharp and probably quite heavy going across the top of the skull. Down at the bottom, we've got a couple of projectile injuries. Well, we have one projectile injury, I lie. On the left is an arrow wound, and it hasn't gone all the way through, and then it's healed, as arrows actually tended to do, rather. So this is ancient. They're all ancient. Top two are Egyptian. Down here, the middle bottom one is, as you see, a gigantic hole which has come into the back of the head. It's probably a warhammer, a medieval warhammer, which has gone into the skull and been pulled out again, so it doesn't go all the way through, and it has not healed. So that's cause of death, which is pretty unsurprising. And let's go back to that skull that I showed you that was a skull pancake. Having glued it together, I deliberately concealed from you in the picture what we spotted, but here it is. That skull was cut straight through by a sword. And various people who know about these things much better than I do could tell me from the pattern of the cuts looked at microscopically and the date, which is Romano-British period or late Iron Age, it's probably a Roman sword that has cut through this child's skull. So that's a part of that child's story through into death. Why on earth, you ask, is she showing you this lovely old poster? Because we're going to talk about the princes in the tower. The Princes in the Tower, I was invited to be part of a television program for Canadian children, an educational program examining mysteries. And it's called Mystery Hunters, and it still runs apparently. It's up to series 73 or something insane like that. And they have little excerpts of young investigators looking at puzzles. So I was asked, would I talk about the princes in the tower? I'm sure you all know the story. The two little boys were the nephews of the man who is about to become King Richard III. He sends them to the Tower of London, and after a while, they're not seen again. Smoking gun, as it were, there. Well, a long time ago, a set of bones from two children was found in the Tower of London. Curious, we say. And they were immediately assumed to be the two little boys, Edward and Richard. He would have been, if he'd lived, King Edward V, and his brother, the Richard, Duke of York. But they are currently in Westminster Abbey, labelled with these names, and you can't go and look at them anymore. So what am I going to do to talk about in this TV programme? I was very lucky. The production company got the records from Westminster Abbey of the last examination, which was in the 1930s. And you can see that this photograph, for example, shows some of the limb bones. It doesn't look so good here, but the photographs were very good and sharp, and the X-rays were superlative. And I created a chart for these two little skeletons. So on the left there, you see the two different skeletons and what they consist of. They're just parts. Fortunately, they contain useful parts for working out ages. Look at those pictures of bones again. So here we have two thigh bones and then some four bones of the arms. These bones are unfused, meaning that they're still growing. And from the extent to which they are still growing, we can work out the ages of children, plus the teeth. So I call it my examination in inverted commas because all I could do was work from this paper evidence and these wonderful X-rays. So in life, young Edward was 12.5 years old. The elder skeleton, according to the bones and the teeth, was in that age range. It's a wide age range, but he was in that age range, or it was in that age range. Young Richard was 9 years, just going on 10 years. The younger skeleton was in that age range again. Ha ha. That's odd. I didn't expect this. I thought they were not going to be the boys at all. We can't determine the sex. We could, if we were allowed to take a sample and do some DNA on it, we might get sex determination, but you can't. When they'd been found, there was said to be blood stains on the faces. This is the implication that King Richard had them smothered, which is what Shakespeare says from Thomas More's reports. Well, actually, if you're smothered, you don't get blood stains on your face anyway, but there was no trauma on these bones that could be spotted. However, they did have some congenital features which they shared. And I'm sorry this picture is less good, but the top picture shows you, look at the little penciled arrows. In the back of the skulls, they had extra bones. The back of the skull is like a jigsaw and it fits together in a sort of Mercedes image, you know, the three-pointed star. But down below this 3 points, sorry about that, guys, are these extra bones in here. They're quite unusual. They're called Inca Bones. Aren't they, my experienced colleagues? Obviously, they're called Inca Bones. They're more common in South American material. They're pretty uncommon in European material. Both of the children had them, and their cousin, this is at the bottom picture, their cousin Anne Mowbray, who was another aristocrat of the time, she had the same, these extra bones. And they all are missing one set of premolar teeth. Now, that's not particularly uncommon, but it's another point to suggest they're all related to each other. The earliest report says there's an extra bone in the thumb. Now, if there was an extra bone in the thumb, that would really be quite something impressive, but I can't find any evidence for it, so bad luck there. Now we're going on to a forensic case where I've really had to take away most of the pictures for you. I'm sorry about that. A body was found burning beside a main road in England. He's been killed over and over and over again. It's a kind of statement execution. I determined the big four. Now, I'm not going to go into why, but I determined that he was probably East European, male. There's his age. There's his height. He's not very tall. He's got a very heavy build. And he has special wear on his teeth. So here are his jaws. And on the front of his teeth, you can see that there's wear or breakage on the top front teeth. He's been doing something, like those ancient people, he's been doing something with his teeth that's caused them to break. That is an altered photograph of the man who it was determined to be, who did indeed have parafunctional wear on teeth. Now, as a final, I'm going to attempt to show you a little video. Here's one I made earlier. This is it. I wanted to show you what I'm working on right now. So I will talk you through. This is one individual. And just to say that this man, a Romano-British man, found lying down, face down, the only one in his cemetery who was in a Romano-British cemetery. He had 26 individual pathological conditions in his skeleton, grouped into 16 different types. So much of a story we can tell about him. He's a big man, middle adult age. So the first thing we're going to look at is, here's his teeth, nice set of teeth. Look at the wear on his teeth, compare with the Egyptians, less wear. And up here, top right, all the teeth are out and there are abscesses, and there's the dreadful dental decay, just stubs of teeth in the top there. Then we go down to his spine. Most of it's fairly healthy, except one section in the middle, very oddly. Look at the frills around the edge of those pieces of spine. That's arthritis. Why has he got it just in one point of his spine? I will suggest something in just a moment. Over we go. Now, here's his neck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 vertebrae joined together. It's a congenital disorder which runs in families. We have 2 other individuals in this cemetery of 40 people who have this disorder. Now, the arthritis on there shows you that that was stiff. It's awkward. When we go onto his pelvis here, at the front of the pelvis, nice and smooth on one side, spongy and rough bone on the other side, it's arthritis again. You don't get this in the front of the pelvis. This is something really odd. What can it be? Right, this is what it is. Just pause for a second. These 2 bones are badly, badly fractured. He's lost an enormous amount of length in the bones of one lower leg. And what is curious is that again in this cemetery, there are 2 other people with exactly the same fracture. What's going on in this site? So you can see, I'll turn it round and you can see where that's the length of the area that's had a spiral fracture. And over there, oh look, that's a cloaca. That's where pus comes out of osteomyelitis. There's the spiral fracture showing on the other side. And the fibula also is fractured at the top. This usually happens if you break one, or if you break a joint, so that's had a fracture as well. So this is part of the many, many things that we can learn from that particular individual. We're still telling those stories. So, just as a reminder of what Jane said at the beginning, my collection is now part of Lucy Cavendish, and I am there to be its custodian and to help people use it for learning. I'll hand back over to Jane now.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much, Corinne. We don't have a whole heap of time for questions. In fact,
sorry, I rabbited on the way.
That's all right.
I do.
Is there any? There were some hands raised, and just Catherine had been trying to remind people to use the chat, and it's really hard to see hand raised on by any other means in such a large group. So if you have a burning question, because there's 100 people here, so I can't hunt for those raised hands.
Okay.
But if there's a question from the audience, if you want to type it very fast.
I can see a funny one, which is what makes me feel squeamish.
Oh yeah, sorry, I missed that one. So what?
Yeah.
Feel squeamish? Anything?
Hairs down the bath plug hole.
No. but in your job, Corinne. No.
But almost nothing else. Gristle in meat. You know, I'm not a great meat eater, but it's not because of my work. Why do I do what I do? Yeah. That's a really good question. Partly because I wanted to do something that was archaeology that was also biology. So that's what took me into the archaeological end of it. And then being able to use that to actually help right wrongs in the case of forensics was just the icing on the cake.
Okay.
What do I think happened to the man in the graveyard? Oh, Bill. Yeah, well, I think he just died, but being so poor, he probably didn't have a fixed space. And the people burying him thought, well, we really want to get him into the graveyard. We'll do a quick dig over here. And what happened, in fact, was that they found someone else was already there. So they pushed the bones of the someone else out of the way. And then they put old Bill in. And then he was found because the grave diggers were doing it again in modern times. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a record. And so they dug in an area they thought was empty.
Oh, poor old Bill.
Poor old Bill.
Can I ask a question, seeing as there's a quick gap there? Just, Corinne, have the analysis of bones ever, this is my background in infectious diseases, but also the current pandemic. I was just wondering if bones and examinations of cemeteries or collections has ever found, outbreaks or epidemics that we didn't know about.
Yeah, there's some really, really good work going on right now, which is about the origins of the Great Plague. And one of the things, they're looking back at previous plagues, and people have been interested in things like, what is the plague of Justinian? What was that? Was it the other kind of plague? And so people in Cambridge, amongst others, have been doing DNA work, not on the individuals, but on the microorganisms that are in their remains. And they have actually found some of the earliest instances of plague way before we have it recognised in Anglo-Saxons from Barrington near Cambridgeshire, which I examined many years ago. And they were sitting in storage. And so they've actually found early plague in there. So that's very good. And we're also getting things about the development of syphilis as an infectious disease, and seeing how the various organisms that are like syphilis are various gradations of mild to severe. It's giving us an idea of how these microorganisms evolve, which might raise our hopes a bit about COVID, that it might evolve into something less dangerous.
Okay, I won't.
Let's not go there.
let's not go there.
No.
I think I'm already running over time. Corinne, this has been fascinating. I bet you've inspired a few more osteoarchaeologists out there that have asked questions. We can ask Corinne for answers to them. And feed those back to development, which would be fantastic.
Yes. So can I continue replying to these questions? Will we? Yeah. Okay. Oh, you've gone silent. You've gone silent. Okay.
Because it will stop when we end it. Catherine ends it in a moment.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Perhaps
just
we
to
could
remind,
drag them
they'll
out.
be,
Yeah.
they'll absolutely be there, and yeah, and everybody's email addresses, of course, are on that chat function.
Right.
So
I will answer them.
she will. She will answer them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, my brain's buzzing with all the different ways you can use bones. And I'm sure you're going to be teaching our students for some time.
Yes. And maybe we will, as we've considered, perhaps offer other courses for outsiders at some time. And
yeah.
Lucy will let everybody know.
Well, we've got this marvellous resource thanks to you and you looking after it. So we're extremely grateful. Just a reminder that next week on the 24th, no, this week, Friday, was it Friday the 24th? We've got the next an additional Lucy in Lockdown talk. So please look at the website for details of that. And thanks to all of you for coming along and joining in and listening to another Lucy in Lockdown talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye, everyone.